episode 105. It was Snape who had overheard the prophecy. It was Snape who had carried the news of the prophecy to Voldemort. Snape and Peter Pettigrew together had sent Voldemort hunting after Lily and James and their son. Nothing else mattered to Harry just now. "Harry," said Professor Trelawney again. "Harry, I thought we were going to see the headmaster together." "You stay here," said Harry through numb lips. "But, dear, I was going to tell him how I was assaulted in the room of—" "You stay here!" Harry repeated angrily. She looked alarmed as he ran past her, around the corner into Dumbledore's corridor, where the lone gargoyle stood sentry. Harry shouted the password at the gargoyle and ran up the moving spiral staircase 3 steps at a time. He did not knock upon Dumbledore's door, he hammered, and the calm voice answered, "Enter," after Harry had already flung himself into the room. Fawkes the Phoenix looked around, his bright black eyes gleaming with reflected gold from the sunset beyond the windows. Dumbledore was standing at the window looking out at the grounds, a long black travelling cloak in his arms. "Well, Harry, I promised that you could come with me." For a moment or two, Harry did not understand. The conversation with Trelawney had driven everything else out of his head, and his brain seemed to be moving very slowly. "Come with you? Only if you wish it, of course. If I—" And then Harry remembered why he had been eager to come to Dumbledore's office in the first place. "You found one? You found a Horcrux?" "I believe so." Rage and resentment fought shock and excitement. For several moments Harry could not speak. "It is natural to be afraid," said Dumbledore. "I'm not scared," said Harry at once, and it was perfectly true. Fear was one emotion he was not feeling at all. "Which Horcrux is it? Where is it?" "I am not sure which it is, though I think we can rule out the snake. But I believe it to be hidden in a cave on the coast, many miles from here. A cave I have been trying to locate for a very long time. The cave in which Tom Riddle once terrorized 2 children from his orphanage on their annual trip. You remember?" "Yes," said Harry. "How is it protected?" "I do not know. I have suspicions that may be entirely wrong." Dumbledore hesitated, then said, "Harry, I promised you that you could come with me, and I stand by that promise. But it would be very wrong of me not to warn you that this will be exceedingly dangerous." "I'm coming," said Harry, almost before Dumbledore had finished speaking. Boiling with anger at Snape, his desire to do something desperate and risky had increased tenfold in the last few minutes. This seemed to show on Harry's face, for Dumbledore moved away from the window and looked more closely at Harry, a slight crease between his silver eyebrows. "What has happened to you?" "Nothing," lied Harry promptly. "What has upset you?" "I'm not upset." "Harry, you were never a good Occlumens." The word was the spark that ignited Harry's fury. "Snape!" he said very loudly, and Fawkes gave a soft squawk behind them. "Snape's what happened. He told Voldemort about the prophecy. It was him. He listened outside the door. Trelawney told me." Dumbledore's expression did not change, but Harry thought his face whitened under the bloody tinge cast by the setting sun. For a long moment Dumbledore said nothing. "When did you find out about this?" he asked at last. "Just now," said Harry, who was refraining from yelling with enormous difficulty. And then suddenly he could not stop himself. "And you let him teach here! And he told Voldemort to go after my mum and dad!" Breathing hard as though he was fighting, Harry turned away from Dumbledore, who still had not moved a muscle, and paced up and down the study, rubbing his knuckles in his hand and exercising every bit of restraint to prevent himself knocking things over. He wanted to rage and storm at Dumbledore, but he also wanted to go with him to try and destroy the Horcrux. He wanted to tell him that he was a foolish old man for trusting Snape, but he was terrified that Dumbledore would not take him along unless he mastered his anger. "Harry," said Dumbledore quietly, "please listen to me." It was as difficult to stop his relentless pacing as to refrain from shouting. Harry paused, biting his lip, and looked into Dumbledore's lined face. "Professor Snape made a terrible—" "Don't tell me it was a mistake, sir! He was listening at the door." "Please, let me finish." Dumbledore waited until Harry had nodded curtly, then went on. "Professor Snape made a terrible mistake. He was still in Lord Voldemort's employ on the night he heard the first half of Professor Trelawney's prophecy. Naturally, he hastened to tell his master what he had heard, for it concerned his master most deeply. But he did not know. He had no possible way of knowing which boy Voldemort would hunt from then onward, or that the parents he would destroy in his murderous quest were people that Professor Snape knew, that they were your mother and father." Harry let out a yell of mirthless laughter. "Oh, he hated my dad like he hated Sirius. Haven't you noticed, Professor, how the people Snape hates tend to end up dead? You have no idea of the remorse Professor Snape felt when he realized how Lord Voldemort had interpreted the prophecy, Harry. I believe it to be the greatest regret of his life, and the reason that he returned." "But he's a very good occlumens, isn't he, sir?" said Harry, whose voice was shaking with the effort of keeping it steady. "And isn't Voldemort convinced that Snape's on his side, even now? Professor, how can you be sure Snape's on our side?" Dumbledore did not speak for a moment. He looked as though he was trying to make up his mind about something. At last he said, "I am sure. I trust Severus Snape completely." Harry breathed deeply for a few moments in an effort to steady himself. It did not work. "Well, I don't," he said as loudly as before. "He's up to something with Draco Malfoy right now, under your nose, and you still—" "We have discussed this, Harry," said Dumbledore, and now he sounded stern again. "I have told you my views. You're leaving the school tonight, and I bet you haven't even considered that Snape and Malfoy might decide to—" "To what?" asked Dumbledore, his eyebrows raised. "What is it that you suspect them of doing precisely?" "They're up to something," said Harry, and his hands curled into fists as he said it. "Professor Trelawney was just in the room of requirement trying to hide her sherry bottles, and she heard Malfoy whooping, celebrating. He's trying to mend something dangerous in there. And if you ask me, he's fixed it at last, and you're just about to walk out of school without—" "Enough," said Dumbledore. He said it quite calmly, and yet Harry fell silent at once. He knew that he had finally crossed some invisible line. "Do you think that I have once left the school unprotected during my absences this year? I have not. Tonight, when I leave, there will again be additional protection in place. Please do not suggest that I do not take the safety of my students seriously, Harry." I didn't," mumbled Harry, a little abashed, but Dumbledore cut across him. "I do not wish to discuss the matter any further." Harry bit back his retort, scared that he had gone too far, that he had ruined his chance of accompanying Dumbledore, but Dumbledore went on.